So it's really you at last. How are you?
I'm pretty tired. I've been recording so much,
You're tired now?
Yeah, I haven't had to sleep in about all night. I've been working on the last LP.
How much sleep do you need to be alert?
Alert? I guess about 8.
8 hours?
Yeah, I had about 8 minutes, so, I think it
Minutes?
answers itself.
I've slept longer than that in my monologue.
Jimi Hendrix was an American musician who is widely regarded as the greatest electric guitarist in history. A talented artist with a troubled past, Hendrix was able to accomplish a tremendous amount in his short career, which spanned only 4 years, as he passed away at the young age of 27. From his early days playing the Chitlin circuit across the South to putting on one of the greatest performances of all time at Woodstock in 1969, Hendrix is nothing short of a legend within the music industry, as he's influenced artists and fans for generations beyond his passing. Hendrix was born Johnny Allen Hendrix in Seattle, Washington in 1942 to parents Al Hendrix and Lucille Jeter. His parents would later change his name to James Marshall Hendrix just a few years later in 1946. His father was drafted by the U.S. Army to serve in World War II, and after returning from service, he struggled to find steady work, which left the family impoverished. Both Al and Lucille struggled with alcohol throughout their lives and often fought when intoxicated, causing a young Hendrix to hide in the closet at their home as a child. Hendrix had 4 biological siblings, but didn't grow up with any of them, as they were given up for adoption early on and were often in and out of foster homes. The family would move around quite a bit, living in cheap hotels and apartments around the city. Clearly, there was a lot of instability at home, and this would go on to affect him as he got older. Al and Lucille would eventually divorce in 1951 when Hendrix was 9 years old, and the courts granted custody to Al of both him and Leon. Very early on, there were signs of Hendrix's obsession with instruments. He had a habit of carrying a broom around to emulate a guitar while in elementary school. In 1957, while helping his father with a side job, Hendrix would find a ukulele with just 1 string among some of the garbage they were removing from an older woman's home, which she allowed him to keep. From there, he learned to play by ear by listening to various Elvis Presley songs and trying to mimic the notes.
Well, I used to do a lot of landscape gardening with my brother-in-law, and I found an old ukulele that out on one of my jobs. Didn't have all the strings, so he got strings for it. He used to plunk away on that.
At just 33 years old, his mother Lucille would develop cirrhosis of the liver, and on February 2nd, 1958, she died after her spleen ruptured. This would deeply affect young Jimmy, but what made it even worse was how his father handled it. He refused to take Jimmy and his brother to attend their mother's funeral and instead gave them shots of whiskey and told them that was how men dealt with loss. That same year, Hendrix would finish up middle school and began to attend Garfield High School, but would not graduate. It was around this time where he acquired his first acoustic guitar for $5, playing for hours on end, watching others with more experience play, and listening to blues artists such as Muddy Waters, B.B. King, and Robert Johnson. Not long after, he would form his first band called the Velvet Tones. The group would play small gigs, and Hendrix quickly noticed that with acoustic guitar, he could barely be heard over the sound of the group. That's when he asked his dad to buy him an electric guitar, and although he resisted initially, he would eventually buy him a white Supro Ozark. Hendrix would continue to secure gigs with various bands, but would often get fired due to showing off on stage or being tardy. At 19, he would get caught up in some legal trouble when authorities caught him riding around in a stolen car. They gave him 2 options. He could either serve jail time or he could join the army, and Hendrix chose the latter. So in 1961, he would officially enlist and was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. While in the military, his obsession with guitars continued. In a letter to his father, he asked that he send him his red Silvertone Dan Electro. When he received it, he would keep it on him at all times. Other servicemen would notice this and started to mess with him by hiding it until he begged for it back. He would play tunes frequently, and one day one of his fellow servicemen, Billy Cox, walked past and overheard him. He was immediately impressed by his style, and from that point on, the two would jam out together at local clubs and on weekends.
I got discharged a month before I did, so he waited in Clarksville for me. Meanwhile, we got some gigs in Clarksville in town. Me and him were together in Clarksville with some other guys, so we split from the other fellows and went to Indianapolis and tried to do a thing which we did unsuccessfully, very unsuccessfully. So we wound up back in Clarksville again. I was working here at Channel 5 in the studio band. When he came in he was working with Richard. And
how was that show like?
It was good. He was the star attraction of the show, really. But he was good. And he came down this way to Fort Campbell with the Owsley brothers. But he split there shortly because they had some big hassles with that outfit. So,
what did you think when you first heard his record, like Purple Haze or whatever? When were you first conscious that the Jimi Hendrix that had a record on the charts was the Jimi Hendrix that you've been playing with?
Right, I did flips, man. I was proud of him.
By 1962, Hendrix would complete his training and he would be awarded the prestigious Screaming Eagles patch, but not long after, he would start to gain criticism from supervisors due to conduct, as he would often be caught napping while on duty. He would eventually be discharged from the Army altogether in June of 1962 under honorable discharge. Just a few months later, Billy Cox would get discharged as well, and he and Hendrix moved to Clarkville, Tennessee, forming a band called the King Casuals. After playing a few low-paying gigs, the band would eventually relocate again, but this time to Nashville, a home for a thriving rhythm and blues scene. For the next few years, Hendrix would make a living performing at various venues across the South that were affiliated with the Theater Owners Booking Association, also known as the Chitlin Circuit. In addition to playing in his own band, he also performed as a backing for a number of musicians, including Wilson Pickett, Ike and Tina Turner, and Sam Cooke. Growing tired of the Chitlin Circuit in January of 1964, he decided to venture out on his own and decided to move to Harlem in New York City. While in Harlem, he met and started dating Lithophane Pridgon, who became his girlfriend and was a well-connected person within the Harlem music scene at the time.
And my mom, she really felt sorry for him. She's Pisces, so, you know, they're kind of compassionate people, you know. So she felt kind of sorry for him. And she would buy him different little things, like maybe a shirt, or he's playing with some jive group that wants you to wear a bow tie or something. You know, we didn't have no money to buy no beer or something. We had sneaked in with living with my moms without her even knowing it, you know, because she go to work in the morning, we come in and go to sleep, and we get up before she gets back and, you know, straighten up and be gone, or either be sitting around like we just walked in.
After some time playing the circuit and entering a few amateur competitions, he would eventually score a gig to become the guitarist with the Isley Brothers. He would tour with the Isley Brothers for much of 1964, but eventually grew tired of playing the same set every night and would eventually leave the band. Soon after, he began a tour with Little Richard's band, the Upsetters. He and Richard would often butt heads over tardiness, wardrobe, and stage antics, which led to him getting fired by his brother Robert. So Hendrix found himself in and out of bands frequently over the years. He would eventually rejoined the Isley Brothers for a brief period, then joined Curtis Knight and the Squires, touring with them for about 8 months. One night they had a performance at the Cheetah Club in New York, and during the performance, Linda Keith, who was the girlfriend of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, noticed him and was mesmerized by his playing. She invited him for a drink and the two became friends.
He was playing the guitar, just the way he was, and there must have been other indefinable qualities that made me feel so incredible. I mean, I'd seen good guitar players before, and I had sort of done a complete freak out, or just, I mean, it was amazing. I couldn't understand how everybody was just quite casually dancing or whatever they were doing, because I felt this was so important. But then on seeing this very tall, lanky guitar player who wasn't taking any notice of what the rest of the band were doing, I can't believe that he was doing the footsteps and the dance routine. Certainly not after knowing him. I can't imagine him any of that. And I really had to meet him. I just wanted so much to know who he was and what he was all about and what was going on.
Hendrix would eventually develop a relationship with Richards, and through his recommendation met the Stones manager Andrew Oldham and Seymour Stein. Stein and Oldham would listen to his music but didn't quite see the potential in him. They passed him up, but they did know someone who was looking to get into producing and managing artists. That's when they referred him to Chaz Chandler, former bassist for the English rock band The Animals. Chaz took a liking to Hendrix and decided to bring him out to London, signing him to a management and production deal. So the plan was now in place. Following his arrival, Chandler began looking for other members to assemble a band that can highlight Hendrix's talent, one of which ended up being drummer Mitch Mitchell and the other being bassist Noel Redding. This band would be known as the Jimi Hendrix Experience. The band would have a short residency at the Big Apple Club in Munich, Germany, and it was here where one of his signature moves was birthed. When trying to escape the frantic crowd, he would end up smashing his guitar for the first time, which caused an explosion of sound. It shocked the audience, but they immediately thought it was just part of the show, and the crowd went wild. After observing their reaction, Chandler insisted that this should become a regular feature going forward. In mid-November of 1966, they performed at the Bag O' Nails nightclub in London. A number of stars were in attendance, such as Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, and many more, who were all in awe of his performance. The performance would secure his first interview published by Record Mirror with the headline, Mr. Phenomenon. Through a distribution deal with Polydor Records, the Experience's first single would be Hey Joe, followed by Stone Free, released in December of 1966, both of which hit the UK charts. The following year, in 1967, they would release the popular hit singles Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary. The success of these singles secured the band a spot in the Monterey Pop Festival in California. Introduced by Brian Jones as the most exciting performer he had ever heard, Hendrix came out and put on a show doing a number of popular renditions such as Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone and Chip Taylor's Wild Thing, as well as performing some of their own songs. But what really made the show was when he ended the performance by destroying his guitar on stage and setting it on fire. It was here when a then 17-year-old kid named Ed Cariff took one of the most iconic photos in rock and roll history. According to author Gail Buckland, the final frame of Hendrix kneeling in front of his burning guitar, hands raised, is one of the most famous images in rock. Author and historian Matthew C. Whitaker wrote that Hendrix's burning of his guitar became an iconic image in rock history and brought him national attention. The Los Angeles Times asserted that upon leaving the stage, Hendrix graduated from rumor to legend. The band's first album, Are You Experienced, was released on May 12, 1967. The album was met with immediate critical and commercial success and is widely considered one of the greatest debut albums of all time. Jimmy's innovative approach to songwriting and electric guitar playing established a whole new direction in psychedelic and rock music as a whole. 7 months later, the band would release their second studio album titled Axis Bold as Love, which would also be met with mixed criticism. Some considered it his least memorable project, but nonetheless, the album peaked at number 5, spending 16 weeks in total on the UK charts. Then finally, in 1968, the group would release their third and final album, Electric Ladyland. It would become their first number 1 album and spent 2 weeks atop the US charts, with many saying this was his magnum opus. Jimmy's playing style was incredibly unique as he embraced influences from blues, rock, R&B, ballads, and jazz. He had a multifaceted approach, including a mix of open string and thumb voicings, double stops, and chord partials. He was well known for his stage antics that he learned on the road, including playing the guitar with his teeth and behind his back. He was not afraid to experiment and take risks as he constantly pushed boundaries and challenged traditional norms. This fearless approach led to groundbreaking compositions and sonic landscapes that were ahead of his time. In 1969, the band would break up after Redding had continuously grown weary of Hendrix's unpredictable work ethic and his creative control over the band. Redding would ultimately leave the group to pursue a solo career, and Billy Cox would become his replacement. By 1969, Hendrix was the world's highest paid rock musician. In August of that year, he would headline the Woodstock Music and Art Fair, which included many of the most popular bands at the time. His performance became immortalized with the 1970 documentary Woodstock. His version of the Star Spangled Banner would become a part of the 60s zeitgeist. Many considered it to be a statement against the Vietnam War, as he used feedback, distortion, and sustain to imitate the sounds made by bombs. Pop critic Al Arnowitz of the New York Post wrote, "It was the most electrifying moment of Woodstock, and it was probably the single greatest moment of the 60s. On September 18, 1970, Jimi Hendrix would pass away at the young age of 27. One of the 60s most influential artists, he was described by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as arguably the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music. The details of his final hours are disputed, but he spent much of his last day alive with Monica Danneman. In the early hours of September 18th, Danneman found Hendrix unresponsive in her apartment at the Samarkand Hotel in London. She called for an ambulance around 11 a.m. and Hendrix was taken to the hospital. They tried to resuscitate him, but failed, and he was pronounced dead at 12:45 p.m. Post-mortem examination determined that he choked on his own vomit. Danneman stated that he had taken 9 of her prescribed sleeping pills before bed. Hendrix's music continues to influence new generations of artists. His music sells more now than it did when he was alive. His entire career lasted only 4 years, but during that time, he changed the course of rock and roll and music as a whole forever.